everybody. So we are going to be learning how to make sourdough bread today. So first we're gonna go over the ingredients that you need because there's only 3. The first thing you're gonna need is your sourdough starter. Well, I guess there's 4 things if you include your sourdough starter. Sourdough starter, then you are gonna need some flour. I like to use an organic flour. The brand does not really matter that much to me, however, I do like this one. Next, you are going to need some, I've got a helper over there playing, some pink Himalayan sea salt. You can use other kinds of salt as well, but I like to use that kind. And then lastly, you're going to need some water. The very first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna put 200 grams of starter in a bowl. And then next, we are going to add 415 grams of water. Close enough. Okay, so after you add the 415 grams of water, you are next going to add in 20 grams of salt. So like I said, I'm gonna be using the pink Himalayan sea salt. And make sure you are zeroing out your scale in between, just because it's easier to keep track of everything that way. So we're gonna put in 20. Okay, we've got our 20 grams of pink Himalayan sea salt, and now we're just gonna use our wooden spoon and stir it all together. So at this point, we are just stirring together the sourdough starter, the water, and the salt. You're just stirring to combine everything, and then we will just move on to adding the flour. This is what your mixture should look like. Just kind of cloudy, stirring it all together. Okay, now comes the fun part where we are adding the flour. So I've got my little canister, and make sure to zero out your scale. We are gonna be doing 635 grams of flour. So here we go. My little helper is playing in the floor. So I've got my Solly baby wrap on just in case she wants some snuggles. Okay, we're at 300. Sourdough bread, it takes a lot of time, but at the same time it doesn't. It's not a lot of hands-on time. It's mainly just giving it time to sit and let the sourdough starter do its thing and work its magic. Okay, so we're at 610, 625, 632. It's kind of the game. 33, 35. Perfect. Okay, we're actually at 38, so I'm gonna take a little bit off. Doesn't really matter that much. You can be a couple over and it doesn't change anything. Okay, so now we are just gonna stir in the flour to our sourdough starter, water, and salt mixture. Okay, so once you've stirred in your flour to that mixture, you are going to be left with something kind of like this. It's thicker, it just looks like a stringy dough. So now what you're gonna do is you are going to cover it with either a wet tea towel or some plastic wrap, and we're gonna wait 30 minutes before we do our very first stretch and fold. So I'm gonna cover it, and then I'll be back to show you how to do the next step. Okay everyone, it has been around 45 minutes since we mixed our dough together. And so it is time to do our very first stretch and fold. You are going to kind of scoop your hand around the edge of the bowl just to get all of the dough unstuck from the sides. And then you're gonna get both hands and you're gonna make like pinching motions. You are gonna pinch the dough and pull it up. Now the very first stretch and fold that you do on your dough, it's very sticky, kind of. It's not very pretty. It's very lumpy, but it will turn smooth and easy to stretch and fold on the next one. Whoa, where are you going, girl? and then the following ones as well. Stretch and fold. Are you gonna help? Oh, you almost got your hands in the dough. Oh goodness. Okay, so I do it 4 times. Sometimes I'll do it a 5th just to kind of clean up the edge of it. She likes to see herself. Yeah, so funny. Okay, so now we've got sticky dough hands. We are gonna wash our hands and then we're gonna let this sit for another 30 minutes. And then we'll do our second stretch and fold. You have to at least do 2 stretch and folds. I like to typically do 3 to 4, but then again, as long as I get 2, I know that we'll be good. So I'll see you in a little bit.
I decided I wanted to try to get an overhead of the process of doing your first stretch and fold. So this is one of the other doughs that I've been working on, and as you can see, you just use that pinching motion, grab some of the dough, pull it as far as it'll let you stretch. Sometimes if it's not stretching like I need it to, I'll hold the whole dough in the air and let gravity pull it down in order to get that stretch going. So then you just fold it over. And here you see the second stretch and fold of the night. So this is that same dough that was in the very first video, and you can already tell that it's stretching a lot better. The dough is much smoother. It's just so fun and so satisfying to stretch the dough when it's at this point. Once you finish your last stretch and fold of the evening, you are going to either put your plastic wrap on top or your wet tea towel, and you're just gonna let it sit for the night.
Good morning, everybody. It is the next day. I think I did my last stretch and fold at 8:30 last night, and then I covered it with the plastic wrap, and I just let it sit overnight. So let me show you what they look like. As you can see, they've definitely risen. They've gotten very fluffy and they look really soft. And so now what we're going to do is we are going to put it on the countertop and then stretch the dough out. And then we're gonna fold it into itself and then shape it. So let's get started. So the first thing I like to do is get some flour, and I like to just dust my work area with some flour. This just prevents the dough from sticking too much. We'll lean the bowl like this, and then you just go through and take it off the sides. And you'll be able to see lots of bubbles. I'll show you what it looks like. So this is what our dough is looking like. It's got some bubbles in it. Whenever you're stretching the dough out, you'll be able to kind of feel the bubbles that are formed inside of the dough. So for this part, you want to start in the middle and kind of get your hands like this and just spread it out. Once you spread it out in the middle, I like to reach my fingertips under the edge and then just pull it out. You don't want to pull so much that the middle part of the dough gets a hole in it, but you do want to stretch it out to where it's pretty thin. And I like to just stretch it out in the shape of a rectangle. So I'll pull this way, stretch this way. And this is why that flour is so important, because it coats the bottom and makes it not quite as sticky. One thing to note is that if you are making your sourdough and you do not do your stretch and folds within 30 minutes to an hour, you will be left with a very, very sticky mess. I have accidentally done this. I just completely forgot about the sourdough that I was trying to mix together. And I thought, oh, you know, I did it 2 or 3 hours after I had mixed the dough together. I'm sure it's fine. So I went ahead and let it sit overnight, and then the next morning I tried to do this whole process, and it was a sticky disaster. So it is very important that you do your first stretch and fold within 30 minutes to an hour, and then, you know, kind of follow that schedule after that as well. At least 2 stretch and folds. So, okay, now that we're at this point, I'll show you what it looks like.
So this is what it's looking like. As you can see, it's pretty thin, but there's no holes in the dough. We've just stretched it out very thin, and you can kind of see this is how you pull it out. Okay, so the next step is we are going to be folding it in to itself. I have one of these tools, and this is helpful sometimes if the bread is sticking to the countertop. Most of the time, since I put the flour down, I don't need this, but it's nice to have it just in case. Okay, so for the first fold, I took this section and I just folded it to the center. So now I've got this side over here, and I'm going to pick it up and fold it to the center. So now this side is in the middle, this side is in the middle. So now we're gonna take the top, stretch and fold it to the middle. And so I put that part in the middle, and now I've got this bottom part that I'm gonna also put in the middle. Like so. Okay, once you get here, you're left with a small rectangle, and I am going to take this side and fold it onto itself again. Okay, so at this point, I like to wet my hands, and this is when we are going to start doing the shaping of the bread. Okay, so I am back and my hands are wet. So at this point, we are going to just be cupping our hands and just kind of twisting and pulling the bread under itself. Whenever I push it back up, sometimes I will kind of pick it up from the middle and like push itself more on top of itself, if that makes sense. So really you're just trying to pull it towards you and create this tight dough ball. And this part is so satisfying. I love it. The reason that I wet my hands is because sometimes if your hands are dry, this process gets so sticky. Cup, hold. And then you're left with this cute little ball. Okay, so at this point, you're left with a nice dough ball. And now the step we are going to take next is we are going to grab one of our baskets. You can use one of these. I got this one off of Amazon, or since I was doing the farmer's market, I only have 2 of these, but I needed to make, 15 loaves of bread. So I just used regular baskets, and then I put the flour sack towel in them, and it worked perfectly. So we are going to do that now. So at this point, we're basically done with the hands-on portion of the actual dough. So we've got our dough in our basket, and you can let this dough sit in a Walmart sack in the fridge for up to like 4 days. And this is where that fermentation process is happening. So now, that's why I said it doesn't, it's very time consuming because the sourdough needs a lot of time to do its magic and do its thing. But it's not like I'm messing with it for the next 3-4 days. So I just tie it, kind of push all the air out of it. I've been doing double knots recently, just because I feel like it keeps the air out better. And so this is what you're left with. And this is just gonna sit in the fridge for, I've baked it the very next day and it turns out great. But like I said, you can let it ferment in the fridge for up to 4 days and it looks great. Now, if you over ferment your bread, so if you go like 5 days, 6 days with your bread in the fridge, it can over ferment and then it just doesn't have that oven spring. So whenever you go to put it in the Dutch oven and you score it and do all that stuff, whenever it comes out of the oven, it is gonna be like this tall. I've done that before too. It still tastes good, but it's just not that fluffy bread that you really want. So I'm gonna put this in the fridge and then we are going to bake it another day. At this point, it's time to preheat your Dutch ovens. So I turned my oven to 475, and while I'm doing the scoring on the bread, the Dutch ovens are going to be preheating, and this usually takes like 20 to 30 minutes. So here you see me scoring the bread. I put a layer of flour on top, and then I've got my blade, and I'm just gently scoring the top of the bread. Originally, I was doing it deeper, but I realized that it looks much prettier if you lightly score the bread. So I just did 3 little leaves or 3 little wheat stems, and then next you'll see me doing a deeper cut, and this cut is so that I can get a beautiful ear on the bread whenever it comes out of the oven, because it will have risen and it just creates this beautiful ear. Here you see me putting cornmeal in the bottom of the Dutch oven. This is to keep the bottom of the bread from burning. It works like a charm, so highly recommend doing that. At this point, after you've put the cornmeal in the bottom of the Dutch oven, it's now time to add your bread in, and then we are gonna bake it at 475 for 20 minutes. Now, after that 20 minutes, you are just going to take the lid off and then lower the temperature to 450. And I like to bake it for around 17 minutes once it gets bumped down to 450, but I kind of just keep an eye on it and watch. You can see here that the bottom of the bread isn't burned at all thanks to our cornmeal. So after you pull it out of the oven, you're gonna let it sit on the cooling rack for an hour and then enjoy.